Alrighty.
Alrighty, let's get going. Okay, I think we're live. Thanks everyone for joining this rather impromptu afternoon streaming session. And we're going to be looking at a thread on Twitter, which is about, I don't know, a year or two old. And it's about The Last Jedi. And I have nothing against people defending what they love. It's when they open their mouths and describe why that we have problems with. And we'll always come back to The Last Jedi just because it's such a lesson to learn of what went wrong. Why is it bad? Why is something so bad? Pick a topic of writing, and you'll probably find it in a poorly done way in The Last Jedi. And of course, you'll have people defending it. So that's cool too. So this is from Brandon Nerd 12 on Twitter. And I'm sure he knows by now because I used his @ on Twitter. So he'll see it. And we'll have a nice little discussion with Glib and Dunn here about it. And we're going to try and critique his analysis because he's using numbers. So therefore, it's not his opinion. It's all the numbers telling us what's what. Let's begin. Okay, so a reminder that The Last Jedi is a well-received, commercially successful, critically acclaimed Star Wars movie, and that a small collection of extremely vocal accounts solely devoted to telling you otherwise doesn't change that fact. Well, I think he might be referring to accounts on Twitter, but even in his own analysis, he will point out that there are user reviews, which I guess are accounts on other websites that show us that they do not appreciate the movie as much as he thinks. So the definition himself of commercially successful means anything that's made over $1. Critically acclaimed means there's a critic who has been paid, so he's a professional critic, which does not account for all the non-professional critics, and that the community is small and extremely vocal. And I think that the community is actually rather large. And some of them are not vocal because they just know something's shit, and they say, this is shit, that's all I have to say about it. So,
yeah. I hear that excuse all the time, that it's like a small vocal minority. It's just a minimization tactic.
Of course. I think a lot of people will use like that, the petition, kind of say, okay, this is the number. It's a small vocal minority. School of Movies did that in his video, if you recall. But it's kind of just, no. Most people hate it, and there are people in the industry who hate it, like that guy who teaches it as a how not to.
All right, let's keep going here. I see a lot of conversation attacking those statements as my opinion or simply not true. Here's my final response to each of the three with some data. Okay, this is where we get actually to some information. This is always, I love it when people back up their opinions with references. It's great. That's what we're looking for here. So 1, The Last Jedi was well received. I see a lot of talk about the Rotten Tomatoes audience score. It seems like the prevailing opinion is that because the Rotten Tomatoes audience score was so low, that means that audiences didn't like it. So this is a 44% of Rotten Tomatoes store users rating it 3.5 plus. So here's the actual value. And the average rating is 2.76. Not sure what that reflects as, but we're talking about 210,000. This was a year ago. It's probably more than that. So 211 at least thousand people giving it a poor to moderate score, I guess. We can be fair with that. Not a very good score. Anything less than 8 out of 10 might not be worth your time. Maybe a movie at 7 if it's like a niche film or a genre piece or something like that. It's not for everyone, so not everyone can appreciate it. But anything below that is bad. So 3.5 stars times 2 is what? 7? Like, not the best review. That's like if your doctor got a 70% on his final exam. You know, there's 30% that he doesn't know that you might be going to, that he might misdiagnose you. So there's lots of ways to evaluate a 70%. So hard to judge just on that. There's probably a niche audience. Why is this movie good? We don't know. And it's not so much how many there are. It's the quality of the review, because anyone can go on Rotten Tomatoes and give it a 10 and say nothing. The same way they can go on and leave a 1. So what does that mean? That's what I want to get at. What's the better review? What value does the score have? That's what I'm concerned with.
So what have I missed?
Oh, hey, Shawnee. Yeah, we're just going through this response on Twitter, and I'm just talking about the necessity for reviews and the quality therein. So not all reviews are equal, even though a lot of people can like something or dislike something. So here we have...
I'd say it seems you're looking at the audience score, and the audience score is only really a way of guessing. It doesn't necessarily indicate quality, but it often just shows you where the general audience's opinions lie. And the thing is, with with like a rating like this, it can be it's very arbitrary, because what people constitute as 2 stars might not be the same level of quality as what someone else will constitute as 2 stars or 3 stars or 4 stars. And it's often just a stab in the dark. It's kind of like when someone says, I scored this game at 8.5 out of 10. It's like, okay, but then they could go to something else, and an often worse game, and they could give it just an 8. And it wouldn't quite make sense, because the numbers themselves don't explain a lot about the quality. It's just a very strange arbitrary system that a lot of people have weirdly stuck onto. But another thing is, when it comes to average ratings, it's often going to be because there's so many people. When you have, let's say you have a 1 star and a 5 star, it's going to, just purely the level of the review is going to massively affect the overall average. So it's going to be quite strange, and it's often going to be more towards the middle mark than it is towards just because there's so many. So it's hard to get an accurate representation of how the audience feels. And the best way to try and get the idea of how the audience feels is, I suppose, by how Rotten Tomatoes does it. And it's like you have the percentage, and the percentage is purely how many people gave it over halfway score. So like, how many people gave it a 3 or and above? It's like, oh well, that's 44%. Okay, that's very much more useful than saying, oh, an average people scored it at a 2.5.
Plus, it's when you review it and how you review it. So we're gonna go over the actual some rating systems on some websites, as well as the responses from people as they exit the theater. And it's a very different and unique perspective. Mm-hmm. And it's the same. I could say the same argument that I had when I was playing a game for the first time, like Mass Effect 2. I thought it was awesome. This is an amazing game. And then I played it the second time. I actually paid attention and stopped and thought about it, and realized just how bad the story was. So we're going to look at IMDb next, which is what he's going to reference. So here he has...
I don't trust any number system that is like a closed source code or whatever. It's like, why would I believe Rotten Tomatoes is actually what it represents? Especially when they've been shown to freeze scores and keep scores pegged.
Yeah, I would say that
I'm looking at art for numbers anyway. What I look for is what the best review system, I think, and this is just, it's not really attention, it's kind of just my standard, is I really like and this is going to sound ironic to some people in the chat, I think, but I like the way that Steam does its reviews. I like the way that you can organize and order them, and it's like, do you suggest it or not? And then you just give a little blurb about what you think about it, and then I just look at everybody's different suggestions and look for patterns. If I see a lot of patterns in reviews, then I judge based on that. And the issue that I think a lot of people have with Rotten Tomatoes is that the audience score is more valuable to people than the critic score. But I don't think that people pay attention to the actual audience, like who is in the audience for that. Because it's a lot of different kinds of people that like these kinds of films. So like finding the right priority set within these reviews, I find, is always difficult. That's why I go to people that I look to on YouTube, whose personalities and priorities I understand to get my reviews from. this the downside of this number system is that you're basically aggregating everybody's opinion equally when I don't do that with my mind, is my point.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say that you definitely when you come to establishing the quality of something, you don't want, unless you're, as I said, unless you're looking for the general opinion of the audience, then the numbers generally don't really matter that much. And I would say that I don't need to see the source code of a review site. But the problem is when it comes to sites like Rotten Tomatoes is that they have been caught removing reviews, they have been caught freezing reviews and all that stuff because of reasons, and that makes them hard to trust. Because if they can do that with Captain Marvel, then what else can they do it with? They're not the ones who dictate what the audience opinion is, but they seem to like to delete reviews, they seem to like to do all these things to, for some reason, prop up certain films, to prop up their own agenda.
Right. As Glib stated, they actually froze the review or the user review score of The Rise of Skywalker. It's been at 86% forever. I've never seen it.
Very high.
Yeah, ever since it was
high.
First came out, and then it's been that way ever. It's like, that's impossible. There's no way it would be frozen at 86. There's no way.
Yeah. Especially when the critical score is really low. The critical score is like 56, and like it dropped by 2% one day, and then it froze. That's very, very, very fishy.
So right now we're going to get into the actual value of the rating system, and he's using IMDb, and he's comparing episode 8 to episode 3. So here it is right here, and he's using the user rating score, I believe. So we'll just click on that. So here it is, the aggregate of all the people. So it's pretty okay.
Oh god, like this run is fucking huge.
Right.
Yeah, I like that we're breaking it down. Someone, Mark in 3D was saying, seriously, responding to a Twitter feed. It's like, it's a big, meaty, chunky Twitter feed, man. There's a lot of little points that don't make sense to break down here.
Right. So what he's talking about is this 7.0 scale versus the 7.5. It dropped by 0.1 since last year when he made that post. But this is all, like, again, I say anything above an 8, I'm concerned with. So above an 8 for episode 3 was a 26 plus 14 plus 16. So you're looking at roughly 56, 57% of the responders saying it's above 8% or above 8 stars, compared to, what is this, 40 to 43% for episode 8. So that's how anything below that, I don't even care. It's like, you know what? I'm not much of a movie guy, or rather much of a movie score guy. I'm just going to look at this. But I'm more concerned with what Glib was saying, finding a person I agree with or has an explained, detailed analysis, a critical eye. So what IMDb has is helpfulness. And this is what also, I believe, Amazon has. We're going to look at Amazon next. But helpfulness explains a lot. So what this means is that you are a fan and you had the time to go onto IMDb, read a review, and say, hey, this review, whether it was good or bad, was helpful. I liked it. I believed in the criticisms and analysis that the person gave or the reasons therein. It could have just been, this movie is crap or whatever, but if you found it helpful, you get a 0.1 up. And that's what I looked at right here. So I did the same for episode 8 as well as episode 3. Just go to the other one. And you can make a very clear contrast of what is the most helpful. So here we have 1, 3, 1, 2. I'll keep going down, and they'll all be like really, really low score. 3, it sucked. It was boring. 2, 1, 2. Like, you just keep going down the list. These are the most helpful, the most quality value reviews on IMDb for episode 8. And we do the exact same for episode 3. So we have 10, 9, 9, 10, 9, 9, 9, 8, 10, 9. Like, it's complete opposite. So this is also an aggregate. This is all just a bunch of people giving their opinions on one board and saying, look, this is why this is good and this is why this is bad. So even if we don't know the criteria of these individuals, people are grading these scores and saying this is more helpful than a critic or whatever. So who are you going to believe more? In aggregate, where there's no opinions, or the actual scores of people giving the opinions and people giving the opinions of the opinions? So that was just IMDb. Then he goes to Letterboxd. I actually went to Letterboxd. They don't have a score based off helpfulness. It's all pretty much the same aggregate. It's just 10 or 0 or whatever you want. I didn't really like that because there's really, like, you could put anyone up there. It'll be just as valid. It doesn't make any sense. There's no grading scale, really, that's objective enough to look at.
There's no criteria. There's no criteria that you can look at.
There's nothing specific. It's just how popular and who has the most likes and dislikes. That's about it. So I didn't really use that as a very accurate representation. And I don't think the scoring, like 3.2, 3.5, it doesn't really tell us much in comparison to IMDb, and just if he's going by a final score or a final average score. The other one was, let's see, Cinema Score. The Research Bureau provides traditional research polling that gives us an idea of what the audience sentiment of a film was as people left. Now, this was interesting to me because, again, as I said, when I played Mass Effect 2 the first time and I finished that game, I thought, this was awesome. I'm going to play it again. And then as soon as I played it again, I got this horrible time. And this reminded me of a guy from Toronto called Roz. And he has his own morning show. He has his own radio show. And this is him exiting the film on December 11th. And everyone gave this, well, not everyone, but a lot of people downvoted this YouTube video. And he was giving it positive responses. He's like, yeah, it was really exciting. I actually know the theater he went to because you could just walk from that theater to this studio. So he did it probably at night. And that was December the 11th. And this is the one at December the 8th. So he has a week to reflect on it, to think about it. And he just bashes the crap out of this movie.
Yeah, I saw that. It was great. Thankfully, interestingly enough, it was Major Lee that brought it to my attention. And then I was just like, I want to watch this. This seems like it would be very informative. And he just keeps going after this guy that say, why don't we change this up to, I hate this movie. It was so funny. Yeah.
So people exiting a film for the first time, they're sort of in that weird, wow, I just went to go see a movie feeling of, and especially a space opera like Star Wars, where everything's exploding and there's all kinds of great music, all kinds of great vistas. So you're going to say, in general, that was great. And then you can go into it a second time or third time or however many times you want to see something and think and use your head and say, what am I really absorbing? What's going on? And that's where your brain starts kicking and going, wait a second. Something's wrong.
This movie is very stupid. It's not as in-your-face stupid as like a Michael Bay film, but it's still pretty dumb.
And here's a response about Amazon. He's talking about rather the sales. I used Amazon as a sales figure just because there's also reviews there as well. So the Blu-ray sales topping 2018 are worth mentioning. If the film was as hated as some claim it to be, it would feel odd to see people buying the Blu-ray movie that they hate. Well, guess what? People bought the Blu-ray and the DVD just to review it on Amazon. Let's see what those review scores are like.
I imagine it's pretty bad.
So here we go.
I mean, again, it's all about who's doing what.
And plus,
can make a value judgment based on any set of people. Amazon is going to have a large reach in terms of what kind of audiences are going to be available. It's also going to be chosen by a lot of people because they have a Prime account. It's also going to be chosen by people because it's easy to use and because there's already content on there that's for free and stuff like that. It makes sense to use Amazon as a metric for a large market segment for all those aforementioned reasons. So that's the validity of what Smut is talking about.
So you have one star, all verified purchases. And we keep going down. And this is just North America. So we have international reviews. And I obviously can't read that. But they're all 1 star. So here we finally get to a 3-star.
I love how one of them said boring and predictable.
Right. So this guy gave it a 3-star, which is actually not bad a score for a movie. But he's saying messy plot along with some silly comedy and underdevelopment characters make this the one of the worst Star Wars movies ever made. So this is very similar.
The worst.
Well, this is very similar to the next review, who gives it 4 stars. It's a great film. I'm a big Star Wars fan, and I love this film. That said, it's my least favorite of all the Star Wars films, if you ignore the prequels, which you should. So he's saying, you know what? I hate the prequels. Fine, we know your bias. But he's giving it he's giving it a 4-star, and he's saying it's the worst out of the 6. So I'll immediately
sorry, I was just going to say the reasoning is in the post. That's the benefit of this review. That's, you know what I mean? I didn't mean to interrupt you. Sorry.
Right. But the thing is, as soon as we learn his 2 biases, 1, he loves Star Wars. 2, he hates the prequels. And even then, he gives it a 4-star. And even then, he says this is the worst out of all the ones he considers Star Wars films. So
like the perfect example of what you just said is like how you measure this person's point of view and compare it to yourself, how to make an informed decision. Because it's like, what's the information that they're giving us? I'm a big Star Wars fan. Okay, we know that they like Star Wars, the concept, and they love this film. Okay, they like this. This is a positive review. This is my least favorite of all the Star Wars films. What does that mean? That means that I love this film. That means he loves all the films, right? Or he or she, whatever. This person loves all the films. So they have a very, very forgiving, positive outlook is what I get from that. The main theme of this film is summed up in a line from Kylo Ren. Let the past die. They endorse that concept if they like it. It's a Star Wars film that wants to tell you to expect new and different things from both it and the films to follow. So they embrace that concept as well, which is great, right? It says right here. So like what I'm trying to get at here is that the details of the review tell you just as much about the person making the review as the content itself. So when somebody is making statements on Twitter about generalizing the entire audience, it's very difficult to understand what they mean, because is there any person in this chat or any person on this panel, and anybody can answer me, that is like this person specifically in the review? Because I doubt it.
Yeah.
it's the same with Star Trek. Let's say you love all Star Trek movies. Well, you know that there's some that are great and some that aren't so great and some that are just bad. But according to this person's criteria, if it's Star Trek, it's amazing. So even the worst thing would be a 4-star to him. And that's why we can disregard that sort of score and that sort of opinion, because it's completely biased.
Well, it depends.
It's
you
something
can
which
incorporate it. You can process it, but you have to process the bias as well.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, go on, Sean.
I was going to say, it's something that's very common among very passionate fans, at least in the beginning, that they'll just... So the analogy I used when talking about it before is if you get some shit, you slap the Star Wars sticker on it, there's going to be people who just love it because it's got a Star Wars sticker. And this obviously it's an extreme example, but it's pretty close to the truth when you look at how some people are praising the films. It doesn't matter about their quality. It doesn't matter about this, that, and the other. All it matters is that it has Star Wars, and if it's Star Wars, they'll enjoy it. And some of those fans, they do come around in the end and have realised it's poor quality, but others just will. They're very stubborn and they won't let go or acknowledge their bias, or that they're maybe wrong about the quality of this thing.
Okay, we can keep going. Most of his other arguments are pretty useless. The Last Jedi is commercially successful. Yes, it made $1 billion here and there.
Yeah.
But
Well, hold on a second. So I think the best way, Smud, that we could proceed with this conversation from my point of view, and you don't have to do this, but the major points that he makes are like the ones that we should contest or agree with, because The Last Jedi is commercially successful. Well, what do you mean by that? Is that a comparative statement? Or is that a statement, as a matter of fact, because of how much money it earned at the box office? Like, specifically, I don't think that it's commercially as successful as they wanted. I also don't think that it mattered that much, but I think it mattered more than they let on. So the idea that this brand is supposed to foster an entire generation of content, video games, television shows, comic books, all of the above, internet things, push an entire brand. The movie did not do that. I don't think it was as commercially successful as people think it was on a wider level. I think the movie itself made its money back. You have the $1 billion, whatever that it made off the name, off the movie. I don't know what you attribute the success to, and what you define as success is going to be contingent on this statement. And so when he says, "Is The Last Jedi as successful as TFA?" Well, you can't honestly expect the sequel to make as much or more money based on previous Star Wars movies, because that's not the pattern. So it follows the pattern of previous Star Wars movies. What is different about its success is that it makes money and has such a critical divisive factor attached to it. And it also doesn't add to more toy sales. It doesn't add to more video game sales. All of those things went down. Merchandising, everything. So,
I would say that the profits of The Last Jedi only have... So the reason why people went to go see that film was because of they liked The Force Awakens. If they didn't... So the profit of the film is only as much as the hype around that film and the... So I would say a lot of the reason why it made so much money is because of Force Awakens. The reason why Solo didn't make as much money was because it was directly after The Last Jedi. And that's when people started to really wake up and realize that maybe this isn't as good as we thought it was.
So there's not much of a demand for sequel content. I've not seen anything regarding the new stories coming out, the books, nothing related, aside from a few comics here and there, to the sequels. So there's no real demand, especially with toy sales, for anything sequel related. So that could be a part of what Glib was referring to, commercially successful.
There's also the nature of budget and reshoot that never get factored into the posted budget. At least that's my understanding.
Also, you have to double whatever the budget that they're giving you, which is an estimate usually, roughly double that for the advertising. And maybe more for T-Ross.
Yeah, and I don't think that T-Ross made very much money, considering they basically reshot the entire film, and they were filming up until what was it, a month before it was supposed to come out? Was that how it was?
Oh no, weeks. It was probably about a month, but a couple of weeks with some of the last reshoots.
Yeah, so that ramps up the budget a lot, especially if they're reshooting, they probably have to redo a ton of CGI, because most of that film is CGI. It looks relatively good CGI, but that just means it's a high amount of workload for those CGI artists to work around what's been reshot.
Well, I don't think that there were that many reshoots on TLJ. I think there were huge reshoots on Rogue One and Solo, which was a sunken cost fallacy kind of thing.
Yeah.
They should have just released the initial cuts or whatever. I want to see that cut more. I want to see Rogue One what they originally were intending, and I also want to see the original Solo cut much more than what was released. And I think that that's a bad precedent, and I also think that the precedent that's Disney, Lucasfilm, specifically Lucasfilm is set, but also Disney had by de facto, is that they're not flexible. They don't have a good sense of humor right now, because they can't have fun. Disney is not the funnest place, the happiest place on earth, because it's kind of eating its own tail right now. If they had this creative renaissance where everybody was being satisfied by everything Disney was putting out, if they were firing on all cylinders with Star Wars and Pixar and Marvel, and everybody was satisfied in each collective little kingdom that exists, then they could be looser with it. But they're so tight right now with it that I don't think that they're going to create any director's cuts of these movies, or have even the desire to hire back people that have been fired from their positions before. And it's frustrating. And I also don't know what the deal is going to be like with their leadership, considering what's going on there. But I don't know. I think it's in the context that he's creating with the narrowness. Of course, it can meet that standard. It made $1 billion. Wow, look at that. You know what I mean? And then the next movie, like you said earlier, didn't do so well. And then T-Ross didn't really do so well. What's the next thing gonna do? Mandalorian did well, but that it almost is like well because it's despite of that what was existent. It's got a male protagonist, which is not the trend anymore, and it's got that Baby Yoda thing, which is very cute and not the trend anymore. So,
plus we have to remember what they spent to buy the rights from Lucas, which was I think around $4 billion of shares of Disney.
Yeah.
So
I think that they've broken even, and now they have a broken property to profit from, and that's the big sadness from their perspective. I think that they have the money back. However, what we haven't also put into consideration is the other aspects of what they're sinking cost into as far as like Disneyland goes, or other things that have to do with Star Wars that they didn't think about.
I think there's also like the toys and the budgeting of the films that is going to kind of pull it down. I think that they're probably like kind of under breaking even. I think just based on the fact that they have to put a lot of money into the budgeting of the film.
Marketing, there's all those tie-ins with fast food places and clothing stores and what have you. So a lot of marketing involved, a lot of other additional expenses for manufacturing of all these paraphernalia. So does this stuff sell? We don't know. We don't know the numbers of everything. So is it as explosive as the original series? Nowhere close. So
I don't think that Toys R Us would have closed. I don't think that a lot of, the business decision to give EA an exclusivity deal and shut down LucasArts or not try and regenerate that was really just short-sighted. A lot of the business plan decisions just seem to be short-sighted, especially the fact that they didn't have the trilogy set up. Should have had a trilogy of films and they could have saved a lot of money on that, but they decided not to. So I have no idea what the actual excess cost is because I don't believe the numbers. And because I don't believe the numbers, I can't be definitive about it. But he can, someone on Twitter can go, oh, look at how many, $1 billion was made off of this. It's like, what's the difference between the given audience for the cultural phenomena and the actual earning of the film based on its own merit? Because you can see that dip with Solo, and you can see that now people are not excited anymore. It's like what we've just been saying over and over again, which is there's a lag period by the time that people actually consider what has been done, and now that it's over, and it's much worse than we set off in every iteration. So a lot of the Last Jedi information that comes from before the Rise of Skywalker is so hopeful, and now all those fans are upset. So we finally have hit that point where the Marvel universe, I think, is after Endgame in a certain way, and what it is it's basically they now have no previous nostalgia really to go on. They've used up all the nostalgia, and now we will see if they can actually produce anything. Yeah. That's the reason why it's so dire right now, because I know I'm stump speeching, but just to finish out what I'm saying, once Clone Wars is done, they have The Mandalorian, and that's like the only new series show that's not really from the like, it's not an adaptation, and yet they want to put Boba Fett in it. They want to put all these other characters in it. When they draw from a well that's not being replenished with water, they're going to eventually run out. And that's what's going to be interesting, because if they have creative people, they should be able to do something with that. But I don't think that they hired the right people for that.
Honestly, I would love to see if Disney would try and tap that fantasy TV show market if they redid the Black Cauldron and turned it into a TV show on Disney Plus.
That'd be creative.
Yeah. Since the Black Cauldron movie sucks. I hate that movie. That is such a bad adaptation of what are really, really relatively good books. Not the best fantasy books, but the main character has a really solid arc throughout it. But the issue is they didn't write it like it was a series. They wrote it as if, we're just going to merge the first two books together. and just kind of neuter it pretty badly because Jeffrey Katzenberg nearly had a heart attack watching that movie in its original form.
What I was going to say about sales, so a better way to indicate profits would be to look at how well the sales of the things like the Blu-ray or the DVDs will do in comparison to other films, because I say, like, in terms of the audience, to look at how the audience is viewing it, it's not good to go off of the money that's made from the film itself in the cinema. Instead, the Blu-ray and DVD sales will be much better because these are people who are going out the way to actually buy it, and you can make comparisons between that and other films about people who are passionate enough to actually go out and buy this thing in a physical copy.
That's like a measure of fandom, though.
I suppose. But a lot of fans I know don't even have a copy of The Last Jedi or The Rise of Skywalker.
Right.
Like, the most they'll have is maybe Force Awakens. And there was also something else I was going to say, but now it's kind of... Oh, yeah. When it comes to... So we were talking about before, the organization of Star Wars, I really would have thought that Disney would have been a lot more careful with this huge behemoth of a franchise that they bought, because they had no plan whatsoever, and everything they've done, as you said, just seems like there's been no plan behind it. Like, especially with the movies themselves, with giving EA the exclusive license, just everything they've done is mind-boggling.
Yeah, it just seems as though they just want to lose money with these creative decisions.
Well, I'd say they don't care. I'd say they believe that Star Wars was so strong that they could just let it do whatever it wanted, and it would have been completely fine. The only problem is they left it in the hands of the wrong person.
Yeah, somebody like I think Midnight's Edge put it the best, where he talks about how Kathleen Kennedy is not a producer like Kevin Feige. She's kind of an enabler. She just kind of like lets the visionary do what they do, since she's worked with Spielberg quite a bit, as opposed to Kevin Feige, who has an overarching plan and says, please set this up through these movies.
I don't know if she lets people do anything. I think she's a backseat director, producer type, because she's been given this opportunity to be in charge of everything. She never was in charge of everything before. I don't think that's ever happened. You give her an ounce of power, and all of a sudden, everything has to fit her vision of it. It can't. It's not. It's the idea of being restrictive versus creating structure. She's making decisions that are restricting other people's creativity, whereas Kevin Feige or whatever, however you pronounce his name, I've never heard it out loud, but Kevin, what he does is he hires the right person for the right property, and he scales it. It's like figures out what works and sticks with it. Like, that's why the Russo brothers got Infinity War and Endgame. I was wondering who that would be, because it could have been any of the Marvel directors, right? Why the Russo brothers? Well, because Civil War worked. It's just simple logic. A plus B equals C. That kind of stuff. That's not what Kathleen does. Kathleen does whatever I want to see. That's what's going to happen. And if it's Rian Johnson, who she has faith in, is like, oh, look at this king. I'm going to give him the ability to do it. Then he gets full ability. And if it's somebody that she doesn't trust, like Colin Trevorrow or whatever, then he's out. If it's something that's not going to match her vision of what it should be, then you're out. That's the pattern I see. And someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know what evidence would convince me otherwise. You'd have to have an insider be like, no, absolutely not. I got to do whatever I want. And then they show me proof, because I haven't seen that.
Yeah. I guess I can concur with that. I think it's kind of just like she thought that Ryan was such a visionary. It's like, oh, this is going to be great. Everybody's going to love this. It's like,
Yes.
No, there's it split the audience like right in half. Kind of, I really hate that idea of that myth of the vocal minority. It's like, no, that's not a vocal minority. This is a widespread. I am kind of glad that they cannot make that argument for Game of Thrones,
because it's even the industry hates Game of Thrones, the ending. Like, Seth Rogen was openly mocking the producers at Comic-Con, which was amazing.
Yeah, it's certainly not a vocal minority when it comes to Star Wars fans, because even just people who I talk to casually who are fans, like, and not even any particular group, or have come together through their disliking of Star Wars. In fact, it's been the complete opposite. It's been that they've come together through their enjoyment of Star Wars. It would just so happen that they all just think that, oh yeah, the sequels are bad. We don't talk about those. And this is a lot of people. We're talking about a group of like 100 people or so. And there's only like a rare few that actually treat the sequels seriously.
We could even take the second point to mean an argument ad populum. How much money did it make? Therefore, it's popular. Doesn't mean it's good. Doesn't mean it's of any value. It just means a lot of people spent some money on a property. So,
well, yeah, exactly. I mean, it's all about these big major points that he's making, 1, 2, 3, and so far it's, you could say it made $1 billion. Yes, objectively, it made $1 billion, but what are the effects financially of the actual market and the reach? And you can see a lot of negatives that they're not admitting to. And that's more evidence for me that it's a downward trend.
Yeah, like Solo didn't make very much money. And
yeah,
they
so
rushed that
we
out.
mentioned that, but like what they didn't make. They don't have, like, yes, they do have a kind of, successful mobile game for phone. That'll be a big market thing, right? But they don't have a lot of working video games that are making a lot of money. They don't have successful comic books. They don't have successful animated TV shows right now, aside from Clone Wars. The Rebels was over, Resistance, no. Like, they had
Damn right.
an old show. The Galaxy Adventure, whatever, this just remake stuff. And then the movies themselves are full of production issues. The only thing that they have going for them right now is The Mandalorian, it seems. And, people are saying, oh, Battlefront 2 is better or whatever, but it's selling for $10 or something. It's not making big money. Their entire production is not making a lot of stuff. And before The Last Jedi, there weren't as many negatives associated with the brand. People that didn't even like The Force Awakens would tolerate it enough. You know what I mean? To see what happened next.
Well, I would say that
after The Last Jedi, people were really pissed.
As someone who never liked the Force Awakens when it came out, there was a lot of overwhelming. So the amount of people who agreed with me was next to no one. There was the odd person, but the backlash against the Force Awakens was there was nothing. Everyone was praising it, and it wasn't until close to The Last Jedi and after it that people started to come to the conclusion that either it wasn't as good as they thought it was, or it was just plain out bad. And it wasn't, for a lot of people I know personally, it wasn't until The Last Jedi came out until they said, The Force Awakens terrible. No, I can't believe I like that shit.
Okay, here's
other people to it harder.
I got to read a super chat from Zach again. Thank you, Zach. Did you see Eric Taxon's video on you, Smud? Won't call him by his fake name because to get respect, you got to earn it. He certainly hasn't earned it. I think Zach is referring to the 1-minute clip of our stream, unless you're talking about that whole thing he did with Jack Saint. I've seen the 1-minute clip because I think Shiny keeps posting it in the chat for some reason. So
what?
Yeah, I saw that, but I didn't see the long response he did.
In his video.
Yeah, the 1-minute one you've shown before.
I just said hello, or I just said hey, and he's like, "Oh, you fucking know you doing."
Well, that was the comment you left in the video, right? I was referring to the video itself, but yes, I have watched it, and I don't care. Whoop-de-doo. He took a clip after us sitting through 4 or 5 hours or whatever, and that was enough. And of course, we're gonna get angry when he says more crap. So. Yeah, that's all we have to say about that.
I did not watch
it. We're desensitized. I haven't watched it. I might look at it out of morbid curiosity.
I watched it.
Everybody go check out Patricia Taxon's Rainbow Road on Bandcamp. That is what I suggest of Patricia's content. If you want to see some talent, and if this person's watching the stream or whatever, clip that. That's my review. That's my favorite Patricia work.
Okay, so let's get to our third point, which is very similar to the first point. The Last Jedi is critically acclaimed. Again, the term critically, what does that mean? And in my brain, a critic is someone who uses their critical thinking skills. They are criticizing another piece of work, and they're going through an analysis of a piece of media methodically. They have a criteria to follow. They have standards that they've achieved over the years. They know what good quality work is. So you would have to then go through every single critic and say what they think, as opposed to just looking at an aggregate, which this guy is doing again. So again, it's the same issue. What is the value and quality of this critical analysis, of this aggregate rather? And that's where everything breaks down. So he can say 90%, 100%, 5%, it doesn't make a difference. It has to have a good understanding, or the review rather has to have a good understanding of what that means. So he's using Rotten Tomatoes. 91% of critics gave it a 6 out of 10 or above. To me, that's not a good score.
That is not a good score. That's a relatively meh score. That's barely above average.
Well, a D, that's not a good grade.
That would be an E or F in some
Well,
schools.
if you want to fail maths and English, then yeah.
Yeah, it's not, D, you get a D minus. There you go, kid. Congratulations.
So if you look at
in the UK, if you fail your maths and English and don't get at least a C, you're pretty much fucked.
Mm-hmm.
So enjoy that.
If you look at the Metacritic, you can actually do that on IMDb as well. Let me just go to there. Okay, so here's Metacritic. And everything starts from top to bottom. And so there's 56 more reviews that are lower than 50, even though the average is 84. So, again, aggregates. Good to know in general, but until you actually review or read a glowing review, like 100 or 97, actually see what they say. And I don't want to go over them because they're pretty long, but all they're doing is saying, oh, I like this. This was beautiful. I like this scene. This was eye-catching. I wasn't expecting that. And if that's all you're doing, if all you're listing is the good stuff, then you're not going to know what's bad. And that's the problem with critics. If they're not being critical, they're not critics. Criticizing is not, hey, I think you're a stupid poopy face, or hey, everything here is beautiful even though it smells like shit, or disregarding one or the other. Then you're missing the point. You're missing what the value of a piece of work is. And then he says, when it all comes down is to personal preference. If it's all down to personal preference, why are you showing us all these numbers?
It is not personal preference. You can assess how well a story comes together that is not related to your own personal preference.
Well, let's say that if it all just comes down to personal preference, then why is he even making this comment thread? Just shut up.
I thought it's all.
Who cares?
I thought everything was subjective.
If there's personal...
I don't want to come on to the internet on the YouTube and just tell people I like thing. This thing is my personal preference. I'm trying to learn something myself and also tell people what I know that's factual, and then discuss information and have a good time and make jokes and spend time. Obviously all the human aspects of it. But what I'm saying here is that the purpose of producing content is about trying to be educational or entertaining. And if the whole thing is just about personal preference, then why are you producing Twitter content or any content at all? Just go and enjoy it or not. Clearly, you're doing something more than just discussing personal preference. You're making all these other points.
Why does it hurt them so much that we hate this movie?
If you're making a statement of quality, then it is no longer being stated as your subjective enjoyment. You are stating the objective quality, or what you believe to be the objective quality of the film, by saying it is a good film. if you say it's an enjoyable film, then that's more. Or if say you enjoy it, then that is more based around what you're saying subjectively.
If you're making points that are not about your personal opinion and your personal preference, then it's not subjective. If it's the objective analysis of something and you're trying to talk about that, that's a more nuanced conversation and has more additive function to it than just stating your personal preference. If you are telling me that you like films, you're more into horror films, I can go, okay, that gives me one piece of information. If you say I enjoy horror films because I like to feel fear because I normally don't feel fear, and I like the tension. I like that part of me being, that response. I want to feel nervous for the characters. Then I go, oh wow, that makes a lot of sense. Then we have something that we can talk about where you can get into metrics like, okay, so now discussing the thing with the person, tell me which films gave you that effect more and why. And maybe I can learn something about something that I don't really understand or experience or want to. And if I did, then I would have more information. It's all about being informed. Now, what is this Twitter thing about? Is he trying to inform us that it's actually successful when it's not? Or is he trying to gloat on the fanboys, which is what it looks like? It's like, oh, all these things that are points as to how I'm objectively correct about this being financially good. But really, it doesn't matter because it's all about personal preference. That's not the point of the conversation, is it?
Right. And his definition of The Last Jedi, rather, I spoke on 3 points of that film that can be backed up with numbers. Yeah, you can use those numbers and you reference them, but what's the meaning behind those numbers? You can't just say, look at all these numbers. Look at how big they are. It's like, yes. What does that number mean? How do you qualify and quantify those values? Then you have to start counting up each individual review, each individual sale, and say, what was going on there? And he didn't really do that so much as say, well, this was sales from overseas. This was sales opening night. And he's like, that's good. What does that mean? Tell us what that means. So yes, you backed it up by numbers. Step 1, where's the rest of your data? Where's the rest of your analysis? What does that mean? You don't, it's like he went to university, took stats 101, failed the class, say, hey, I can do an aggregate. I know what numbers, I know what a chart is. It's like, yes. What's the correlation between this and that? Can you give me a correlation agreement? Can you draw that?
It seems like here what he's saying is there reporting out there about solo toy sales, Galaxy's Edge, and otherwise. Could those things be doing better now if people had liked The Last Jedi? Probably. Thank you for the admission of everything that we're saying. Now, what's the next part? But there are a number of other factors that play. Blah 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 blah. Yeah, sounds a lot like a coping mechanism for the fact that one very valid point was just admitted to, which is that if people like The Last Jedi, instead of it being a 50-50 divisive type thing and splitting the fandom into different sections and giving people a negative opinion on the new canon, then obviously everything else would flourish more. That film would do better. Everything would do better. So at that point, what argument are we even making?
Yeah, that's why
we're not talking about other stuff.
His last tweet that explains everything to me, because the same thing with that reviewer from Amazon. It's pretty much, I love everything Star Wars. So his biases are obviously he's biased towards Star Wars. We knew that from the start, but now he's admitting it. It's like, yeah, I love everything about Star Wars. I don't love everything, but I do love Star Wars, and I believe that we can all love it in our own way. Very similar to John, who came on last time. He's like, yeah, everything great. I want a safe space for everyone to talk about Star Wars. And
no, he called it a positive space.
Oh, sorry.
I wanted to point out that because I felt like I was almost, you can bring in other factors that are like, this is why this thing wasn't doing very well, but they're all tied to the same constant, which is Kathleen Kennedy's leadership of Lucasfilm. That's the number one thing that doesn't change no matter what. It's the same people in charge. You lose Curie Hart at one point, but it's the same story group. It's the same producers. The differentiation, when you get someone like Dave Filoni and you get someone like Jon Favreau, that changes the situation and creates a different product. So objectively, there's something going on there. That's the thing. And I see in chat, objective analysis of what? A painting's paints? Like, objectivity is just regarding facts. So the facts of how something is made is part of its presentation. It's part of what it is. And the additional thing that's on here about this whole objective versus subjective thing, because I hear it all the time. Like, if we're not comparing the Mona Lisa versus Pollock, because doing these like comparisons, there's no value, in my opinion, subjectively, to making that comparison. However, if you want to do objective analysis of how the Mona Lisa was made and how the brushstrokes worked and what colors were used, that's objective analysis. If you want to create the same color conditions in a live action film as the Mona Lisa and take a photograph that has similar lighting conditions, you can objectively analyze that and know where the light was coming from in the studio at that time. That's what I'm talking about. Where there's so much information that's missing from just dismissing the idea that you can objectively analyze a piece of art, because especially performative art and especially technical, materialistic, utilitarian pieces of art that are all about formalism, those pieces of film, those video games, all have elements in it that are mechanical and you can analyze, like code, like standards that have to do with the standards and practices of how film cameras actually work, the aperture, the shutter speed, all these things are measurable. It's not a mind game that's being played. It's material. And that's why we analyze it as such. And it's so frustrating that people are going back and forth between, oh, it's a commercial art, look at how successful it is, but really, oh, it's all subjective and it's art and doesn't have to be successful. So like you can be principled and see and split these things, but you can't go back and forth whenever we're talking about one or the other. And I see that all the time.
Yeah, it's like, let's please talk about the mechanics. The mechanics are broken, smothered in rust, and they don't quite work. There's a lot of little first draft mistakes that could have been fixed. But unfortunately, Rian Johnson rushed this out over the course of a couple of months.
So, I mean, like, it's all about the context of what we're talking about. It's like, we're talking about a Star Wars film. So then that means canon. That means aesthetics. That means specific moral messages and philosophies that are within the functional, mechanistic idea of this universe and the characters within it, the intentionality of the author, all of these things. If those things are not met, you're not going to be able to profit off of what has been the engine of that has been working. If you start changing things, and if you have a set of constants at the top of all the decision-making processes that result in a product that is going to have only like this type of protagonist, only these kinds of conditions, or a lack of respect for canon and characters that were previous, you're going to have a net negative effect. I don't understand why people wouldn't think that this is the case. It's been proven over and over again. Every franchise that kills off its characters that are the heroes 30 years later, that comes back, turns them into deadbeat dads, all this stuff. You can make money off of people going into the theater because, oh my God, it's a new Terminator movie. Then when they leave after you've killed John Connor, they're not going to come back. That's it.
No.
So it's literally what is that myth? The golden goose? Like, you keep roasting the goose instead of realizing it lays eggs. That's what Hollywood is doing right now. That's what the entertainment industry is doing right now. And the people that are in charge of it, I think the perfect example, especially for this channel, is like the Last of Us. If The Last of Us makes a bunch of money, it's not going to be because this story is good. It's going to be because there's still fans that wanted to play The Last of Us. That's why the leaks are so important, because the leaks revealed. Imagine if the Last Jedi had the same leaks as The Last of Us. Would then people be making all sorts of memes that were like the Joel and One memes for Luke Skywalker? Probably. Now, that implies a lot, because if they can't nostalgia bait people, they can't make a profit. And that's what Solo proves, which is why it repeats itself over and over again. And it's not just Solo, it's Battlefront, it's every iteration, it's Resistance, and it's what they've done in small pieces to Clone Wars. But again, Dave Filoni, to his credit, is there to remember what Star Wars actually is as a rule set. So we can go back and forth, like on, oh, is this good or not? The fandom that we're measuring, and I think kind of what Smud wanted to talk about here, is absolutely objectively getting smaller and more divided into smaller sets and arguing with each other about what the canon is now, because nobody wants the new canon. Except for the Reylos, who don't even want it at the end of the day because they want to reject the last movie. It's a mess.
I was going to say about the second last tweet here in the middle of the page is those of you insult, like he's pretty much, you guys are making fun of me. It's like, yes, on this thread are part of the problem, and you know it. So we're the problem because we disagree with him and we say mean things on Twitter. I'm not going to call you names, but realize that Star Wars is moving forward with or without you. That's true, it is, and that's the problem. You have to bring the fans.
But can it move forward? But can it move forward without any kind of fans, without any kind of audience? That's the question.
Not in the way that
No.
they wanted to make the most money out of, at least, which was the movies. So, yeah, you have the shows, you have the miniseries, you have the
like
comics, the books.
The cart giving the middle finger to the horse, and the horse is like, "Fuck this shit, I'm out."
It's a strange thing to say. It's going to go forward
Mm-hmm.
without you. It's like, no, it's not. That's not how products work. A product line needs the support of the people buying it. So you can't just keep
Exactly.
pushing
You're so right.
something forward because
It's
someone said so.
a horse and cart is a very good analogy because it is the audience who are buying it and funding this are the horses pulling the franchise.
Yeah, and you see that with Kickstarter. We see it with the small projects where there's more money going into those projects than needed, and they want more of just a comic book or a turn-based video game or something simple. They give hundreds and hundreds of $1,000s more out of this one product. And I think if that's the way things are going to be, we're going to just be supporting these smaller creators making really cool things that are small, not big like Star Wars or big like AAA titles on video games. They're going to be small things. And then those companies are going to get bigger and bigger very slowly. And we're going to see bigger and better things. And then we're going to have this wonderful, beautiful standard of independent entrepreneurs, creative types coming together saying, hey, we're going to make a monthly video game for you. It's going to come out in stages, and maybe they're going to pay us via Patreon. So there's no need to, get this bestsellers item or this elite premium edition. It's like, no, everyone gets the same thing. It's all the same quality. It's all as high as we can make it. And we update you every week or every month. And that's already the case for many games I've seen already. So that might be more the model, because now we have Netflix, now we have streaming services where people get things faster, smaller ways, smaller doses. And it's Star Wars. We have The Mandalorian. We have Stranger Things. We have all these weird little 80s nostalgia things that are being more attractive.
I personally really like The Witcher.
Yeah, it's an amazing series. It started off very rough and it got better. It got better very quickly because the people who made it are actual publishers. They started off as publishers. Like, yeah, we want to get games out there. Well, wait a second. We can do this ourselves. We can make games. And they came out with The Witcher. And that spawned 2 other games, a bunch of other, Gwent games. I think they're making another one, a story-based one. I don't know them all. I haven't been keeping track. And of course, there's Cyberpunk, which is huge. So they're doing all the stuff. And they are now the gold standard for the industry. CD Projekt Red is the gold standard for RPGs, for video games, as far as I can tell. Not to say Nintendo isn't bad or all the other bigger names like EA, Tencent, Blizzard, they're up there for sure. But it's this little company from Poland who just says we can do better. And they did.
That's really interesting. It's a relatively low market game. It really well.
And it's based off an author as well. Like, what a great idea. Take a video game and base it off a popular author of that culture, a Polish author.
Technically it's a sequel to the books.
Really?
Yeah.
It happens. I haven't the book games, but I have watched Wolf's review where he kind of talks about how books and kind of the author has kind of made some cool stuff to the ending, but the games is kind of finishing the story up.
I gotcha. Okay. Well, I think that's all we have to say about Brandon Erd 12. I think that was nice to go over because people seem to use stats and numbers in very biased ways or unconfirmed ways, and I'm not a fan of people using numbers to skew ideas. You see enough of that in university where you get whole papers that either don't know how to understand a graph or don't know what numbers mean. And all he wanted to do was show us numbers. Well, he did. But then he tied it up with all this other bias of it being a good thing, of it doing well, selling well, critically acclaimed, that sort of, all this sort of words that don't add up to what is actually there. Not a very good quality product. So, is there anything else anyone else want to talk about or mention?
Well, just in like summation, well received, commercially successful, critically acclaimed. Like well received, I'm sure that accounts for a certain community. Commercially successful, I'm sure that by the definition of making $1 billion, it did. Critically acclaimed, yeah, by the critics that liked it. And I would say that the irony of the statement is that the people that are considering it well received and making it commercially successful and considering it in their circle to be acclaimed by the critics, I think they're the vocal minority. I think the vast majority of people are silent and just don't like the films casually. They're not like super invested. The people that are invested, that are loud, are small fandom menace, the real vocal minority. We're vocal because we're trying to represent a larger community that don't really speak up about these issues because they're not really involved like that. And it's worth what we do because people do listen. For every one, YouTuber or whatever, there's 100 people listening to them or whatever, thousands maybe, or their opinion matters, or critics and writers and that kind of thing, educators. Their opinion really matters to people that are trying to learn things. And we can't just let this kind of activity go without criticism. And so I don't think by the larger standards that we ourselves set, it's actually as financially as successful as they want it to be, because I, as a larger thinker, as for the business side of it, I see a lot of failures covering up, being covered by $1 billion. Just because a film makes $1 billion doesn't mean that it grossed any more than 200 million or something. If it's a 300 million or $250 million production, that's only a $500 million return with the marketing and all of that. That's not that much money. Think about how much Joker made off of the smaller budget. It made a similar amount of money, but the profit was higher because it wasn't as advertised necessarily as much, and it had a much smaller production budget. So that's the real measurement of the movie's success, is going to be the multiplicative effect of how many times do people go see it? How many people actually saw it? Did they buy the Blu-ray, like Shiny said? And it doesn't hold up to scrutiny, basically, is the summation, this guy's Twitter thing.
Yeah, it's the difference between, I don't know if you guys know stocks, but there's a dividend yield and there's a dividend percentage. And the yield can be anything. It's the percentage that tells you, out of what you spent, what are you getting back? And with with a big name like Star Wars, you get a big dollar value back, but a very small yield. Whereas with Joker, you get kind of a big number back, but a huge yield in returns. So that is.
There's also things that bought that other company, like other things, couldn't buy, like a willingness to watch future DC projects, buying into a new audience. And all that kind of stuff. But if we look at economics and the way that companies want a return and they want growth, and that's all the basic forms of investment, how can we say that Disney is growing their product? Or how can we say just Disney's growing their product from Lucasfilm? There's the growth aspect is not there. And that's not something that he was talking about. He actually admitted that there was a less profit from the movie. And he didn't look at the effect of the movie's finance, like the financial return by itself, $1 billion. I get it. But then the effect of that financial return and the effect of the movie on other products, he didn't want to talk about.
Okay. Anyone else want to share whatever final comment, or want to call it a day?
I don't have anything else.
Discuss function.
Function?
Yeah, why don't these people actually talk about the actual dang movie?
They have to know about it.
They have to actually study movies, yeah.
Yeah.
But okay.
And it's like you want to educate people on not how to watch movies, but how movies are made. Then you have to know how to do it and have a willingness to educate people. And that's different from somebody that just wants to tell people how movies personally make them feel and how they should be, or how they shouldn't be this way.
Well, we're watching movies wrong.
Exactly.
to come to that conclusion takes so many jumps of ego. It's like, I'm right. Not only am I right, you're wrong. You're wrong because of this. Not only wrong because of this, you're doing it wrong in the first place. It's like, okay, thanks, Patrick. That's great.
Yeah. And chat, take it easy on each other with the debates. It's YouTube chat. Chill 'em. We're just trying to have a good conversation here. You don't have to get into weird Mauler debates.
Right. So I think we're done. Thanks, guys, for listening. I think we're having another Smudcast tomorrow. I think Southpaw's going to be joining us. And what the devil was the topic?
Nice.
Yeah, I can't remember what the topic was, but I think it's going to be another positive video. It just might be about a video game. I'm not sure which one, though. We're going to find out. But thanks for listening, guys. Thanks for joining me. I wasn't expecting Glib and Shiny to pop in. Thanks for Dunn for communicating and being there for me. I appreciate it. And we will talk to you guys soon. Take it easy.
Thanks for having us on.
Hey.